So, hello all. My name is Justin Lacey. I'm a RHEL Specialist Solution Architect. Nate.
I'm Nate Legger. I'm a technical marketing manager in the RHEL business unit.
And I'm the outsider. I'm Alex Dorjan. I'm an Ansible solution specialist, so all the fun things with Ansible I'll be going through today. But obviously we're here to talk about Advanced Image Builder. Conveniently, it's not the same demonstration that you saw during the keynote this morning. So stick around if you like demonstrations that are live and always have the fun risk with them. Justin.
Okay, so I have two jobs here, right? The first job is I need to explain to you why we're even having this conversation, okay? The second thing that I want to do is arm you with information so that you can go talk to management to explain why this is important and give the facts for why this should be something you do. So I'm going to make a little bit of a game out of this. This is what I call an opportunity. And by an opportunity, I mean your opportunity. The game here is this. And every time we list data, there's always subtext to it. Something that is important that isn't necessarily immediately obvious. So this is a post that came out by Gartner about growing workloads. And there's two key pieces of information in this. The first one is that infrastructure as a service is growing at the highest rate in 2023. The second thing is that traditional workloads are outpacing platform as a service options. Now, the question I have for you guys is, what do you think the subtext is here? And since this is the first one, I'm going to give you a hint. The hint is this post is from last month. This isn't something where we've been hearing about it for a long time, and no, they went and verified that that's current. So what do you think the subtext is? What is the event that's going on right now that people are thinking about? What's that? AI. Good guess. Well, I mean, automation is something that we care about. Obviously, it's something to make our process a lot more consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of steal a little bit of my own thunder here. It's actually uncertainty in the economy. Okay? So one of the more interesting comments that I thought was great is when they did the survey, they asked people, they said, okay, how does uncertainty in the economy affect your cloud migration plans? And you know the funny thing about that? 45% of them said not at all. Another 45% said they expected to increase their cloud usage. Okay? The importance of subtext. It's not something where we're just telling you this one time. It's something that's current. Okay, so let's go to the problem. So if you have a traditional infrastructure background, these problems are going to be very common to you, right? Typically, if you're an infrastructure architect or a system engineer, you don't have complete control over several different things. Like, this is actually a 10 list, but I only chose the top 3 because that's the one we're going to focus on for this solution. Okay? The first problem is, chances are you do not control your budget or your timelines. There is an element that is dependent on your business. So you have to come up with plans that keep that in mind. The second thing is that, let me make sure I can read this. Oh yeah, not having an exit strategy. So let me first preface this by saying that this doesn't mean you have to abandon the cloud. This means that sometimes you have workloads that get deployed in the cloud that end up being things like more expensive than what you expected. And then suddenly you have to shift to be able to put it back on-prem. Or maybe there's a security requirement that prevents you from deploying everything that you want in one place. So you need to have a strategy for that. And the third thing is, I have a saying, complexity grows like weeds, right? So I'll talk about this a little later on, but the more different integration points that you have in your build process, the more potential places that you have for delay, inconsistency, and issues. Everyone good?
Yeah. In case you haven't noticed, half of these themes align with what the keynote was today. Doing more with less with stable budgets or decreasing budgets, and you need to be resilient, scalable, wherever it is. We understand what works today probably doesn't work tomorrow, what doesn't work 10 years ago, that won't work in another 10 years.
The other point that I like to make is this is a lot of the why. Trust me, you're just going to have to bear with me. We're going to get to the demo. Alex is going to show you all the cool stuff, and you can ask him all the technical questions you like.
You gotta let Justin blabber a little bit. Make him feel.
I do have a habit of, I have a lot of stories. So if you ever want to talk, just come and talk to me. Okay, so more data. So this one's pretty self-explanatory, but I want to ask you again in a second, what do you think the subtext is? So 2 pieces of valuable information. The first is that the majority of organizations that were surveyed said they were already in the public cloud. Probably not that surprising. They also said that more than 25% of their workloads are in the public cloud. So what do you think is the subtext here? Let me know if you need a hint. Sorry, what was that? Scale. Free. I get that. So, what's that?
Flexibility.
Very true. So here's the hidden subtext behind this. 87% of organizations are multi-cloud. 72% of those are hybrid cloud. If you have to design a build structure that works for one cloud provider and then a completely separate another process for another provider, you are adding complexity to your environment, you are doubling your testing, and it gets worse the more providers you have. So what if you could have a single common workflow to do all of that, right? Well, there's one last slide here, and I'll hand it off to some of the more technical people. This one right here. This one's super self-explanatory. But the main point here is that 40% is the #1 answer for what people said was the most successful thing they did for their cloud migrations. And that was to standardize on their operating environment. Okay? Guess what the subtext is for this one? Any ideas? All right. I'm like shooting people down here. The subtext is that they standardized on Linux, and specifically, the main choice was RHEL. Okay?
I think this continues to play out, whether it's the operating system, whether it's your cloud, whether it's your hypervisor, whether it's your cloud container platform. Picking a standard is what matters. Picking a standard development tool, a development cycle, all of that becomes a process because either A, I'm holding people back because there's uncertainty in what I should use, or there's the free-for-all, and now I have 20 different tools that I can't support, and then eventually it just gets to the point of, how do I manage any of this? And then everything stops until it merges back to, here's what the standard is, and let's move forward with that. So it's always easy if the base layer has that standard already applied, and then I can build on top of that. So whether it is the container platform or the automation platform, I'll throw that in there, of course. But it gives you that standardization going forward. So at least there are fewer things that have that variability built into them. Because if you've ever run commands on a single OS, especially Linux to Windows, nothing's the same. So build that consistency, make it easier, and then I have fewer things to teach people. Because I only have so much brain power for any given day. So try to keep it easy.
Okay, so I was a customer a long time before I came to Red Hat. And one of the things that was really important to me was I wanted to make sure that whenever I went to Summit, I gave you resources to work with. I didn't want to give you a hypothetical. I wanted to show you something, right? And that's part of what you're going to be seeing coming up. But the goal for this presentation is exactly what we have listed here. It's to meet all of those problems that we just described and give you a simple, consistent, cost-efficient way to deploy your workloads.
So what else are we going to talk about? So obviously, if you went to the keynote this morning, you saw a little bit of the hosted service capability of Image Builder. Well, we'll go into the actual on-premise version of RHEL. So hint, there are 2 versions. We'll talk about that. We'll also go into more of what is it, why does it exist, how does it work? And then, because everyone loves live demonstrations, we'll do a live demonstration of Ansible and Image Builder together. And I'll go through some of the lessons learned I found out while trying to put all this together. Because I am the first to admit I am not an Image Builder expert. But I'm dangerous with automation, and I can do all kinds of stuff. So again, if there are questions throughout, please let us know. I like it interactive. And in theory, the demo will run smoothly. So we'll see how that goes. So Nate.
Mind if we swap here so I can? All right, so there's 2 technologies at the core of today's demo. There's the automation, of course, is done with Ansible Automation Platform. And then RHEL images that are created with the RHEL Insights Image Builder. So what's Image Builder, right? Image Builder is a tool that's included with your RHEL subscription. It's not an extra thing that you have to go out and buy or whatever. It lets you easily deploy or build images of RHEL, as you might imply from the name. These images can be created in a number of formats. You can output them for your cloud provider. The big three are supported. You can also output them for VMware, right? Or standard QCOW images for folks that are using other virtualization platforms. You can even output these things to an ISO file that you can pop onto a USB stick and put into a physical machine and build your image right on there. Or not build, but deploy your image right on there. And you can even push them directly to your cloud provider, which is a pretty cool feature, right? So I don't have a demo of that today, but there's a video of me on YouTube doing this on AWS where I build out an image using the hosted image builder service. And we push it directly to AWS at the end, right? All I have to do is give it my account ID, off it goes, and I can build an instance right there on AWS. So pretty useful stuff right from there. That's not what we're doing today. We're going to build them and then customize and deploy. So, all right. So what, right? We have lots of ways to build RHEL. Why do we need another tool to build RHEL, right? We've been building RHEL for, well, Linux in general for decades at this point. There's automated ways to get it done. Personally, I've got like a 2-decade career as a systems administrator. I know I don't look that old, but trust me. I've done a lot of Kickstart. Who does Kickstart? Who's familiar with Kickstart? Yeah, that's what I thought. Everybody's probably heard of, used, cursed at, and dumped hours and hours of their life into Kickstart. I know I have. I probably have hundreds of hours fiddling with Kickstart, getting things just right. Who's ever tried to run Kickstart on your cloud provider? To my knowledge, it isn't possible. You can't pixie boot and pass off a Kickstart file and whatever, right? So what you do usually is you just deploy your cloud images. Either you build them yourself on-prem and push them up to your cloud provider, or you use what's built into the cloud provider. Well, Image Builder gives you another option. It lets you really easily deploy a customized RHEL image. It doesn't do everything that Kickstart did, but it doesn't have to anymore. Image Builder is a tool that's meant to give you that base, right? So that you can then come back in with your automation afterward. Because when Kickstart was designed, we didn't have cool things like Ansible. We had Bash scripts or Perl, right? All right, so what does Image Builder do? Let's see, I have a quick bullet list here. It'll give you that base software installation. You can install certain packages at image creation time, right? Generally stuff that's in the RHEL software repositories, but you can add in third-party repositories as well. And you can bring in, I don't know, just a great example is EPEL, right? Everybody uses EPEL. Bring in those tools that aren't included with RHEL. You can do that with Image Builder as well. Or, I don't know, maybe you've got security and compliance needs. You need agents put in, whatever. You can build those things into your Image Builder image. Baseline security policies with OpenSCAP. I think up until today, that was only available in the on-premises Image Builder, but I think that's a new feature that came out for the hosted version as well. But basically, you can apply an OpenSCAP policy to your image while it's being created. So the image comes out the other end, that much closer to being ready to be compliant for folks that have to be compliant because you're in an industry that requires that. And this leads to consistency and repeatability, right? So I can design one image. I can build it for all these different destinations. I can deploy it in all these different destinations, which means I have a clean starting point. And anyone who's spent any time as a sysadmin knows having a clean starting point is important, right? Less drift, the better. All right. Yes. Yeah, you can do, that was a big complaint, maybe request we got for the early days of Image Builder is that it just laid out a flat file system. It didn't do separate mount points and whatever. That's all possible now in both versions, the hosted and the on-prem. All right, and of course, you'll see in a few minutes that this can all be built into an automation toolchain, which makes it that much better. So speaking of automation, if I'm already automating my deployments, then why do I need a thing that's building these special images? Well, that's because some things just make more sense to build into your image, right? So things like the partition table. It's hard to change that after. Yes, it can be changed after. It's harder to especially contract a file system shrink a file system. Say you've deployed it and you're like, you know what, I really didn't need 50 gigabytes in root, but this other build needed it, this one doesn't. It's hard to make that smaller. So with Image Builder, you can define that partition table in the build process, and it comes out the other end with the partition table you define. Now, of course, you can still change it later, but just one less thing you need to worry about after deployment.
Got a question over in the corner.
Sure, what's up? Yeah, that was the question at the front. Sorry, maybe I should repeat the questions. I'm sorry. So the question is, can you build it with LVM? Yes, you can build it with LVM. I guess the other thing is, if you're going to come back with automation, you need an automation user, right? Sure, you can add that after the fact, but doesn't it make a whole lot of sense to build that base image with your automation user already in there? Well, Image Builder lets you do that too. All right, so beyond that, if something needs to be done on every system regardless of its purpose, like those agents that I talked about, that's a great thing to build into your image. Things like custom software repositories, base package set, the core OS. I don't mean core OS like the package, but the core operating system. And agents, stuff like that. I already touched on some of this stuff. And of course, baseline compliance and security. These are all important things. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the flow of what Image Builder, like what the process looks like. And this applies to either the on-premises one you run yourself or in the Insights hybrid cloud console. So basically, you choose where you want to deploy to, right? You might wonder, why is that the first step? Well, because it is. It's just, it helps inform the decision process as you're going through, right? And you can pick more than one output, right? You don't have to have separate builds for separate outputs, although they do turn into separate builds in the back end. But you can say, I want AWS and VMware, right? Because you're in a hybrid deployment, right? Or AWS and Azure because you're in a multi-cloud. Or you can pick all of them and you end up with everything at the other end. Then you want to decide which tool you want to use. There's the one that's hosted at the hybrid cloud console. That's just basically a hosted version of the same tool or a very similar tool. They aren't always feature parity just because that's hard to do, but that's a thing. Then the on-premises hosted version, you basically install some packages on RHEL and you can build these things right with RHEL. There's a web console plugin that makes a nice little GUI so that you can just go through and build your blueprint through a nice web UI. Makes it easy. And then you can make these things repeatable. The really cool thing is, if you design an image on, say, RHEL 9.1, and you have all your images out there, right? You have the TOML file. And then 9.2 comes out, and you're like, great, now I got to start building 9.2. You just submit the same TOML file. It pulls in the latest packages and builds you an image with the latest version, right? So if you've got applications that are really easy to redeploy, right? This is the model that they've been promising us for the past 10 years. You can deploy RHEL, deploy your image, and now you don't even have to worry about logging in to do those DNF updates every time there's a major release, right? You do that periodically, and boom. I'm not saying that's the only way to get it done. You can, of course, still do it the old way. But all right, then, of course, like I said, you create the blueprint. There's lots of options to this thing. I'm not going to go into all of them for the sake of time, but I already covered a bunch of the stuff you can change. You make the blueprint. That's the customizations I was talking about. Then you submit it to the build queue within Image Builder, and it does just what it's supposed to do. It takes all the decisions you made, and it builds out an image. And then it gives you the output. The output, like I said, all these different formats. You then deploy it wherever you want to deploy it. Personally, my home lab, I use this to deploy my own VMs for testing and whatever features that I'm doing demos on or whatever. I have a base image that came out of Image Builder. I use Vert Customize to go in and make a couple of changes, and then I deploy it right on my libvirt RHEL box, right? But that scales to cloud providers, VMware, wherever it is that you want to run stuff. All right, and I think we're back to Alex.
Sweet. So this is actually the demonstration portion, so you'll see a quick blip because amazingly I can't do a laptop and watch a screen at the same time. It doesn't work very well. So I'm going to switch to mirrored. So this is the automation platform. This is going to be kind of that starting point for everything for me because I know some of us love command lines and you can build the blueprint yourself, but what if I don't know how to build a blueprint for Image Builder? I can use automation for that. I can steal what someone else has done. So that's kind of where the automation platform comes in. As you'll see, I've got a lot built into the automation platform, but I can kind of scale that down based on what the end team or end user needs to do. Conveniently, I've named my templates called Summit. So I've got 2 that exist here. The only one that I'm going to run today is the build image using Image Builder. But if you also notice, I use Ansible to set up Image Builder, because maybe I don't know what's needed to get Cockpit and Image Builder all up and running and an Apache web server in the back, or maybe I know how to do it, but why not steal what someone else has done? And I'll talk about that in a minute, because we did something called validated content with Ansible, which someone's already pre-done all of this for me. I didn't have to figure out how to create a Jinja template to create the blueprint file. Somebody else did that for me. And you know what I love about Ansible? Stealing other people's stuff. Because if I don't have to do it myself, it makes the process a lot easier. So I took that next step and said, well, can I build a survey to ask people some questions? Of course I can. So for myself, I've got 3 hypervisors in my environment. I have Red Hat virtualization. Yes, I know, I've got some old stuff. It happens. I have VMware, and I have Azure as well. So maybe in this case, because this is an on-prem environment, I want to build an on-prem image. So I will build for VMware. Conveniently, I've already built some of these before. So I'll call it VMware Shadowman. Yes, my lab's called Shadowman. Yes, Red Hat will yell at me for that. That's fine. As Nate alluded to, well, I need a user on there, because my plan is to use automation. Shocking. I want an Ansible user, and then I can create whatever password I want. I will also walk through in a second. I have it set up where it will also use an SSH key. So if I just want to use key validation, I want to set that up out of the box, I can do that as well. So similar to what they walked through in the hosted image builder earlier this morning, that exact same process exists here. And I'm just going to run this automation. So as of right now, nothing exists in my Red Hat Enterprise Linux box. Again, conveniently named Summit. So this box exists. There is no blueprint existing right now. So in the image builder service through Cockpit, nothing exists. So I have no blueprints. I have nothing set up at all. But there's some customization I did previously, because if I go into manage sources, if you notice, this isn't reaching out to CDN. This is actually reaching out to my satellite. So maybe I've got custom repositories or custom content views that I want to leverage in my build process. Because you've got extra security considerations, you have extra reviews. That's my content view that I'm leveraging for this. So that can be built into this process as well, for especially for those like, all right, I don't want to take things directly from CDN. We've got a review process. We go through our lifecycle promotions. Okay, leverage that as part of this process. So again, it makes this thing much, much easier as I do it. So obviously, building's going on in the background. It's doing all kinds of stuff. What is this actually doing? So let's dive into the code itself. So this is the actual playbook that is running and building that image today. Doesn't look that complicated. I made some nice variables because everyone likes variables to make things easier. But I could define this entire thing for the end user. Why is that nice? Well, this all lives in my GitHub, which means I have a version control history of every single build I ever do. So I know exactly what packages I've done at what point. I know exactly the fact that I'm putting in an SSH key. I've got mount points in there because we talked about that before. And I'm applying an OpenSCAP profile. All of this is already built into my image, and I'll even show the logs later so you can see I'm not lying to you about how this is being built. And I can also set up specific services. So if I know, hey, this is a web service, I need to make sure I can actually get to HTTPS. I can define all of that out of the box because I know what the purpose of this server is. Or I could go very minimal and just say, I want a base image with SSH open, because otherwise I can't really connect to that device and do a whole lot. And I want an Ansible user. That's it. So you've got a ton of flexibility in setting that up based on what kind of your end goal is. So before I did all this, obviously I kind of skipped the steps. I was like, hey, I set up Image Builder, I set up all those pieces. Have I ever set up Image Builder before? Nope. But I stole someone else's stuff because that makes it easier. So conveniently, Red Hat has created a collection called infra.os build. Again, very creative with our naming conventions. And it's called setup server. Also creative naming convention for the role. So that goes through the process of setting up Cockpit, setting up OS build, and actually setting up an Apache web service that it pushes the images to so I can easily pull them from source. I don't have to go into Cockpit, download them. I can say, here's the link directly to that image with the Kickstart file as well. So all of that's built into this. And because I went through the fun of trying to figure this out myself, by default, Image Builder points to CDN, which if you're internally hosted and you only have satellite available, doesn't work very well. A lot of things will fail. So step one was figuring out, how do I fix that? Went through the docs and realized, wait a minute, there's stuff inside Image Builder that says, hey, here's how you update the repositories to point to satellite. I said, wait a minute, there are folders and JSON files that need to create. I can Ansibilize that. So I went through the process of, well, I can Ansible-ize that so every time I deploy, I know I'm setting it up to point to my satellite, no matter who deploys this and when they deploy it. And I'll talk about why that's nice in a minute as well. So this goes through the process of, again, templating out that file. I like SSL certs, and I also like making sure that it has the valid SSL cert to connect to my satellite, so I'm not disabling SSL verification or anything like that. I ain't doing any of that insecure stuff. So it goes through that process, and then also, as you saw with Image Builder, I like SSL certs again. So I deployed the Cockpit SSL cert and the Apache SSL cert as all part of my process. So one job, one playbook that goes through the process of calling essentially 4 roles, 3 of which I had to figure out because, again, I like things to work a little bit nicer, and then 1 that came out of the box that really did the complicated work of setting up Image Builder. And then the other part was, again, very simple of, let's build the image. This is pretty straightforward. I'm kind of just defining what packages I want, what users I want, and what services I want open. Are there a lot of options, as Nate kind of pointed out? There are an excessive number of options. If you've never seen a blueprint before, I know this font's small, so I'll increase a little bit. But this kind of goes through all of the different things that you can build in, so I can pick specific versions of packages. I can do all kinds of stuff. So I kind of went down the list and said, do I want to figure out, all these different pieces myself? Hey, I can customize host name, keys, time zones. Look, I don't want to learn how to figure out the different syntax for all of those. I can just build it here. So that's where the validated content comes in of Ansible.
So I've been doing some playing with this. Normally you need actually like 2 blueprints. You need one for a base image and then like one for the other sub-images you put in out.
So in this case, we just need one for what this is building out. So I just have that one image that I'm building, and it leverages some probably other pieces behind the scenes.
Yeah, I guess that'll depend on how many variants of the image you're trying to get, right? If you want one base image, you need one blueprint. If you want variations of that image, is that what you're trying to get done?
Maybe I'm complicating because I'm using OS tree. So.
Okay, that could be. I haven't tried it with OS tree.
So this is conveniently that validated content. This is that infra.osbuild.builder. And as you can see, are all kinds of variables that I can set. It walks you through the whole process. If you're very lazy like me, 9 times out of 10, you'll probably scroll to the very bottom. And that's what I do. And here's a convenient example with a lot of the things already built in there. So I can go through the process conveniently. If you notice, half those things are very similar to the example. But then it can go through the process of just running the role. But as Nate alluded to, if I have Kickstart, and I want to update the Kickstart file that it's built to, or my Kickstart's job is to call back to Ansible to do the post-provisioning configuration, I can build all of that into this single file. So I don't have to have 15 different places to do this. I don't have to know anything about how to create a blueprint. I just put in the specific variables, conveniently builder AAP URL, username and password to connect to it, and then obviously the URL that has that configuration, or I build it into a larger workflow that can handle the other pieces.
I was curious, can you push a blueprint to the Insights hosted version of Image Builder, or is this only a...
So what this is doing, it's only using the on-prem. There is actually an API endpoint that you could hit. I thought about playing around with that before this, and I said, it's changing enough that at this point it didn't make sense. But that's what I love about Ansible is if there's an API that I can hit, which everything on, actually they finally posted a nice API doc for every single aspect of the hybrid cloud console. I can just say, here's the API endpoint, here's what I want to do, push that way. So it gives you both options. I'll say this for starting was much easier, but you've got that capability as well.
If you design a blueprint in the hybrid cloud console, in the list of images, there's a little drop down. You click on that, and it says download JSON payload. That'll give you exactly what you'd have to pass back to the API to repeat that same build. So you can download that and modify it and upload it, or just keep it in your Git repo or whatever you want to do with it, and every time you need to build a new one, resubmit it. Or, I suppose, pass it through automation.
Yeah, Ansible to push that JSON back to it, and then that JSON gets stored in version control. So again, I've got more control over what's going on. So I know we kind of threw out there are a lot of different image types. There are a ton of different image types. There are an excessive number of image types. Obviously, today we were focused on kind of the traditional hypervisors, but I can also extend out to Edge. So if I want to build Edge type images using Image Builder, that is possible as well. So you've got a lot of variety in terms of what you can do, what you can deploy. So kind of what does this look like as an architecture? I know it's building in the background. So many, many components that are part of this. Obviously, I've got, in my case, I'm running RHEL 8. I could run this on RHEL 9. Doesn't really matter. I've got Image Builder, which obviously is using the image blueprint that I've created. How did I create it? Ansible. Don't have to figure this piece out. Yep. So this actually is going to create a Kickstart file for you. But I could use, if you've got an existing Kickstart file that you want to put into the image and as part of the build process, you could do that too. You've got flexibility. Yeah. So, and also within the Kickstart file, I can put all kinds of stuff in there. So you've got full customization. Again, that all ends up in that playbook. Yeah. So I'll say it does both. So I don't necessarily have to use a Kickstart file if we don't want, especially when we talk in the cloud, Kickstart files tend to not work very well. So I may need to build around that if I know this image is getting deployed to Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud. So that may force me to do, all right, maybe I need to build a little bit more into this image, make sure I have that automation user set up, and then build into my, basically my deployment process. All right, as soon as that deployment's done, here are what typically Kickstart would do. So now I need to make sure it's registered, I've got the appropriate repositories enabled, I've got whatever other things that you do as part of that Kickstart. That's kind of where I see that transition happening. And that's where, if you want consistency, either A, I do a workflow of automation for all of that, or I make my Kickstart point to that Ansible project and it actually does that for me. So that's kind of the other ways. As people start shifting away and realizing it doesn't quite work everywhere, how can I make that a little bit more consistent? That's what I start to see. Yep.
Just a quick add-on to that. I don't know if you're wondering if Kickstart is required to use Image Builder. If that's what you're needling at, it may internally use Kickstart in some way to make the image, but you don't need to manage Kickstart is really what I was getting at when I was talking about a quote-unquote replacement for Kickstart. I don't know that Image Builder can set the IP. You could use like Vert Customize or something, I think, to either directly write a configuration for your network, or there may be a function within Vert Customize that will set up a network interface. I'd have to look more into it though.
Yes.
He had his hands up first. I'm sorry.
I'll come back to you, I promise. Go ahead.
Some of my customization, some of my workflows will push within LVM, volume names and stuff. So can I did not, I did, in my minimal research, I couldn't find an option to actually customize the volume names and stuff in Image Builder. Is that a possibility?
With the on-premises version, you might be able to. I don't think the Insights hosted version lets you tell it, like, you want to change the name of the volume group or whatever. I think it just comes out with the very generic name of RHEL. Because we're creative in how we name things.
Shocking.
That's probably the sort of thing we would want to see as a feature request. So I don't know if you want to go through that, but you could.
The person to talk to. You had a question on it. You could, as long as you've got it. So can you kick this off via some sort of CI/CD pipeline? So as long as I have a way to point to, in this case, Image Builder or the hosted Image Builder service API, you could. I don't know, I guess, what use case do you see for that? Is basically as the teams are going through their application build process, hey, let's spit out a brand new image. So I guess the question is, how often are you building brand new images versus using the image? You could, because what I would typically, yeah, go. Oh, so yeah. So what I would do is, this is the perfect thing to, I've already got the image created, pushed to VMware, to Azure, to wherever it is. And that's where I can have either the CI/CD process directly call that because it's just standard image, or have your CI/CD process call Ansible, deploys the image, does the configuration, and then deploys the actual software itself. So you can do any kind of variation of those. And I know there's a question over here. Yep.
If I still have substantial bare metal that's kickstarted,
Yep.
I also am targeting VMware and Azure, and I want to do all as consistently as possible without having to edit things in two places. What is your recommendation to move a lot of what I currently might do in Kickstarter to the Ansible stage, or how would you integrate that so that I can change my blueprint in one
blueprints for bare metal versus virtualized?
So, sorry, I was taking a note based on what you were asking about. So, Image Builder so it can output whichever, right? So are you asking if you need customizations based on, say, the type of hardware you're running, or like?
Possibly, but perhaps not. Like,
So
I'm going to get an ISO and a Kickstart file that's going to result in the same amount of given to a
well, it'll give you an ISO. It'll give you a QCOW file for, like libvirt virtualization. It'll give you a VMDK for VMware. It'll give you an AMI for AWS. It'll give you whatever Azure uses for Azure, right? So it doesn't, then you would take that and deploy it in the normal ways that you would deploy an actual disk image, right? So I don't know if that answers the question. You don't have to leverage Kickstart is kind of the point.
Right, but that's what, okay. But deploying just straight bare metal would use some image blasting at that point?
So you would take that ISO file, and I guess you could use like a PXE boot process or something to then serve that ISO off to your bare metal. Or you could physically put it on a disk and pop it in, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it needs to be done at scale. So
Yeah, I get that. Right. Just giving you options.
Pixie and that ISO is already has the customizations done. So it's just no further.
Right.
The
That'll
goal-
already have it built into the ISO.
The goal here is to give you one build, multiple different deploys to several different sources.
So how often do you think you're actually running Image Builder? You think you're running this 50 times a day, once a week, once a quarter? How often are you rebuilding images? Probably not every 5 seconds. So this doesn't need to be living all the time. So how much of this build, conveniently in the one black square dots, how much of that can be deployed automatically? Entire process. I can deploy a RHEL 8 or RHEL 9 VM. I can configure it to already be connected to satellite. I can then deploy Image Builder. I can set up this web server. Conveniently, that's part of the role that I walk through. And then the actual build process is now also automated. So I could actually have this set up as a schedule in controller to run whatever periodicity you want with your version control history of that file, which obviously will build the blueprint at runtime. Do your deployment, push it to wherever you need to go, and then destroy. So some of the teams internally have done stuff with OpenShift virtualization and this concept. Because I don't need to necessarily have the VM running on VMware or wherever else. I can spin it up in OpenShift virtualization, do the process to create the image, push it where it needs to go, destroy, go about my day, and deploy to as many different instances as I want. Because, again, I don't need this running 24/7, so why would I? Take the compute resources back, destroy it after it's done, go about your day. That's kind of the beauty of automation, how this can be built is I don't need to have it running all the time. So I kind of did want to, very briefly, because I know we're getting close on time. So validated content, I know I threw that out there quite a bit with this OS Builder role. Essentially, one of the things that we've done internally, similar to all the push with automation and AI and Lightspeed, is we do this stuff all the time. Why not make it easier for you to do these things so I can give you automation that already has figured out the piece of using Image Builder, automating the entirety of the automation platform, using RHEL system roles as certified content. We can give you these pieces and say, hey, we know how to configure X. Let's give you that capability instead of you having to figure out, all right, how do I do this? What Stack Overflow page do I go to figure this out? Take it from us, use that content, get off and running. So it is available already. That's actually how I got the role, conveniently enough. And it will be even easier to consume coming in June when we roll this out at a much more convenient level. So the important question is, did the image finish building? Let's give ourselves a refresh.
Drum roll, please.
I've got an image. That is a good sign. And I'll even increase the font size. It's convenient. It does have my Ansible username and it has my SSH key. That's also a good sign. Do I have some packages in here? It'll probably take a minute to load, but I should have some packages that show up. All right, I've got the 4 packages I put in there, obviously plus the dependencies, because if you install Ansible by itself, it tends to not work very well. Shocking. And then I have an image. Sweet, I can actually deploy this. And for those of you that care about, hey, I need to prove what I actually got put in there, I've got Lux.
During the creation of the VMDK, does it actually reach out to vSphere somewhere?
In this case, no. So for the on-prem version, it does not. However, conveniently, if you notice there's a 404 page right here, I actually created an Apache page with my Kickstart file so that's the Kickstart file. And if I want the image, I have a direct link to that image. So I could say, hey, vCenter, pull from here in this data store to pull from this to pull the image in. So you can do automation to do that. So that may be like the next step is, I know where this is going to deploy to because conveniently enough, it's my image name / images / the actual name of it automatically deploy that to Azure, to vSphere, to wherever you want it to go as well. So that it would be an additional step, and I know that's something they're actively trying to work on for this role as well. So there should be some new things coming out to try to assist with that process of, yeah, now I've got it, what do I do? It's not very useful if I can't immediately deploy it, so that's kind of that next step in the life cycle. But I did all this. I know very little about Image Builder. Yes, I could go through the process, as you saw this morning, of going through the GUI, creating the image, doing, all those same options exist here. But now I've got a version control history of exactly what I did. I can build this 15, 20, 17 other times. So I could set this up, again, as a workflow. All right, I want to build Azure first, then VMware, then Red Hat Virtualization, then VMware. All right, that's done. Once I know all the images' names, let's go through that process of pushing them to the correct hypervisor, destroy everything once it's done, or maybe I need to steal the log somehow and put that to somewhere else because I need the SBOM all over again, as we talked about this morning. Great, throw all that in there. Here's my proof of compliance for the base image. Here are all the packages that got installed, and I'm off and running. So it really does simplify some of those processes where it all lives in here. And obviously, I can keep this here, so I don't have to worry about, it's going to disappear, because obviously, services update. We don't maintain your images in the hosted service for, 30 years. If you want to keep it in here on your on-prem version, you can do what you want. I don't know if I would recommend keeping, 70 different image versions all maintained. But again, this gives you some consistency as you go through that build process. Yep.
Have you used Packer, and if you have a comparison?
So one of the things I will say is this. I was very concerned when I was trying to figure out the solution that I wanted to go forward with. And one of the things I wanted to do was a way that I could do it completely within my automation workflow, right? So I didn't have to have branching off dependencies for other types of applications. And could you do it with Packer? Sure. If it was me, I would do it all in the scope of my automation. And it just so happens that Image Builder works really well as a building block in that automation. And that's what we're trying to show.
And then obviously, since I've conveniently thrown out Ansible a bunch of times, we've talked about, all right, now I've deployed it, what do I do? Whatever you want to do. So the scope of Ansible is endless. The wording I throw out there is, if there's an API I can hit, or there's a command line, command I can run it with Ansible, period. And this obviously extends well outside Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I've seen people automate the Philips Hue light bulbs in their house. I don't recommend doing that. You'll scare people, especially if you put on a schedule to change colors throughout the day. Or Raspberry Pis. It really doesn't matter. If there's a way to connect to that device in some way, shape, or form, I can automate it.
Not to mention network gear, Windows.
Windows, networking. We've automated more. I've probably at this point automated more things than I care to admit. The joy of having a lab that you get access to and break things. So obviously, as we went through this process, we definitely learned a lot. I found out the difficulties of, hey, if you're doing an image builder on-prem that can't reach out to the CDN, it doesn't work very well. So it's taken those steps back to go through that customization. And personally, I'm lazy and like to do things all over again. So I said, why am I manually doing this? I can write a playbook for this. Because now I've automated that entire process for setting up image builder, deploying all the certs, and now deploying the entire process. So I could, again, have this as a single workflow scheduled in controller that runs however often I want. The number of things that I have automated in my environment today that happen at 3 a.m. on Saturday. I don't care. I don't need to be awake. It'll be there. And the beauty with images is, worst case scenario, what happens if the image build fails? Nothing. I just don't have a brand new image. I still have an existing image, so that new image never got pushed to the hypervisor. Nothing stops. So that's why a lot of things I do. So I rebuild execution environments for Ansible every Saturday morning. If it doesn't work, something fails, well, that new image never gets pushed. I never update Ansible to use the new execution environment. Things work just fine. So it's figuring out the things that I don't need to be awake for, that I can automate, that I can schedule. And yes, I'll have newer images once a quarter, once a week, however often I do it. But it doesn't need to be this, all right, I got to come in first thing Monday morning to do this. Or nope, it's the first day of the month. It's my responsibility to build a new image. Just automate it, schedule it, let it happen, get notification if it breaks, but then go through that process. So it just makes it much, much easier to do. Yes?
I'm lazy too, so where can I go to see your code?
That is a great question. So conveniently, I will tell you. If you're lazy and you want to steal my code, where can you go? So
Sysadmins are lazy. It's our job to be lazy. It's our job.
if you go to github.com/shadowman-lab, all of my playbooks are here. So it's not just what exists for Image Builder. Conveniently, I think it's called Ansible-Image Builder is the repository that I use for this. I will verify that. So let me just check image.
Our goal is to be a resource for you guys, right? So if
Yeah.
you have questions, don't think that you can't talk to us after this.
Come find me at the RHEL booth. I'll be there all day.
And if you want our
except for
email
the other talk I
addresses.
have this afternoon.
This is how you get a hold of us. We're all US based. So if you have questions. So the Ansible blog is somewhat where I stole this from. Since I know there's the question around API, there's this blog. So if you write down the name using hosted image builder via its API, it walks through like curl commands. If you run hosted image builder, conveniently curl commands can be URI module and Ansible. There you go.
Boom.
So that was kind of, I was like, can I do that? Yes. Do I want to spend the time? No. Because I also knew that they're making a lot of changes for Summit, and I was like, I can see this going very poorly. So decided to hold off on that. Yeah, and obviously,
Thanks everybody for coming.
the experience team is around, so if you see any of these people, please tell them, especially if you have, hey, this would be nice things to add into Image Builder to make our user experience better. They would be good to talk to as well.